All car owners change their tires depending on the season, and this is now the norm, prescribed by law. But 30 years ago, or a little more, all car owners in the Soviet Union did fine without it, having tires in only one set. The question arises, why is this so? And there is a completely logical answer to it. There were only a few factors, dictated by the way of life of things. Several decades ago, winter tires were too expensive a pleasure, and therefore inaccessible to most ordinary drivers. On the same set of tires in the 80s and 90s in the Soviet Union, they basically drove until the last. And when they changed, they also gave them to, for example, a neighbor in the house or an acquaintance who rarely leaves. And it was enough to drive to the dacha a couple of times per season. Winter tires in the Soviet Union were intended for all seasons. The tread on them is deep enough to make it possible to leisurely drive from one point to another. In general, drivers of those years behaved calmly on the roads, without recklessness. Almost all drivers could easily remove a tire and vulcanize a tube. Unfortunately, in our time, not every driver can do this work on their own. Soviet people did not drive their personal cars to shops and work every day. They had public transport for this. They drove their own car out of the garage a couple of times a week. And for some even less often, especially in the winter. No one left their cars in the yard for a long time. Everyone had a garage, and for many, theirs was located on the opposite side of the house, on the outskirts of the city. Another important factor is the traffic density in the USSR. Even in the larger cities, there were never any traffic jams on the roads. Since the traffic flow was small, the highways were empty. A huge number of cars did not accumulate in the courtyards of residential buildings, which simply stood on the sidewalks or even on the lawns. In modern traffic conditions, it is basically impossible to drive on summer tires in winter. In this regard, drivers knew how to behave on snowy roads and coped with difficulties quite well. If you remember the Soviet times, then a car was then more of a luxury than a means of transportation. Anyone could not just buy one, and at any time. Therefore, when the purchase was finally made and the desired car appeared, it was looked after as a real treasure. They drove it very carefully. For a long time in the USSR, car tires were all season and were used all year round, since there were simply no other. This was quite enough, since the traffic on the roads was calm. There were no traffic jams, people rarely drove their own vehicles, and drivers behaved calmly on the road. And how do drivers drive where you live? Please share this in the comments. Please like and subscribe. There will be many interesting videos ahead.